Welcome to Real Moments. Today's story is not just about uncovering secrets. It's about discovering the quiet strength of a man whose life meant more than anyone ever realized. It's a story of family, grief, and a legacy hidden in plain sight. Sometimes the people we think we know best are carrying whole other worlds inside them silently, humbly, and with no expectation of recognition. This was the case for Tom Henderson, a quiet retired carpenter from Helena, Montana. To most, he was simply the man who fixed fence posts, built nursery cribs, and walked his dog at sunrise. To his children, he was distant but dependable. To his wife, Laura, he was a loving yet mysterious companion of 40 years. When Tom died unexpectedly one cold March morning, the town mourned a good man. But what no one knew, not even his own family, was that Tom had lived a secret second life. This story begins not with his death, but with a letter, one that would unravel everything his family thought they knew about him and lead them on a journey hundreds of miles away from home. What they discovered in a Seattle safety deposit box would redefine not only who Tom was, but what he stood for and how one quiet man had changed dozens of lives in the shadows. This is the father no one knew. Tom Henderson had always been a quiet man, a retired carpenter in the small town of Helena, Montana. He lived a life of quiet repetition. Every morning, he'd rise at 6, make black coffee in a chipped mug, and sit on the porch watching the wind move through the pine trees. At 68, his days were filled with small repairs for neighbors and long walks with his old dog, Jasper. He wasn't cold, but reserved, even with his family. Tom loved his wife, Laura, deeply, though he rarely said it. He cared for his children, Ben and Ashley, but never told them stories of his own youth, never offered life lessons like other fathers did. He built furniture for friends, volunteered to fix the church roof after last winter's snow, and always insisted on paying full price at the local diner. Quiet dignity, people would say. A man of few words, but solid as they come. Then, one cold March morning, Tom collapsed in his shed while crafting a rocking chair for a neighbor's newborn. He was pronounced dead of a heart attack. An hour later, the town grieved. His funeral was modest. Friends and neighbors brought pies and memories, and his children stood bewildered as the only father they'd ever known was laid to rest. A week after the funeral, a letter arrived in a thick envelope from a law firm in Seattle, addressed to Laura. It was postmarked before Tom's death. Inside was a short note in Tom's handwriting and a key. "My dearest Laura, if you're reading this, it means I've gone. There are things I never told you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you. The key is to a safety deposit box at Wells Fargo, downtown Seattle. Go with Ben and Ashley. Everything will make sense soon. I love you more than words ever said, Tom." Laura stared at the letter, heart pounding. Why Seattle? What was he hiding? That night, she shared it with Ben and Ashley. Their reactions were mixed. Confusion, suspicion, curiosity. "Dad barely ever left Montana," Ben said. "Maybe we didn't know him as well as we thought," Ashley whispered. 3 days later, they boarded a plane to Seattle. At the Wells Fargo branch in downtown Seattle, Laura clutched Tom's key as if it were a lifeline. The bank manager led them to a private viewing room and unlocked a medium-sized metal box. Inside were folders, dozens of them, neatly labeled E. Martinez, W. Kwan, S. Patel, and more. Beneath them, photographs, handwritten notes, and news clippings. Ben pulled out a manila folder labeled B. Thomas. Inside was a photo of a boy, no older than 10, sitting on the steps of what looked like a group home. Attached was a note: tutoring, 2012 to 2014. Math and woodshop, foster system. Now attending MIT. Ashley opened another. Lisa, our single mother, met 2009, helped with housing, job training, now owns bakery. One by one, they realized the folders documented people their father had quietly helped for over 15 years. Former foster kids, single parents, immigrants, veterans. Dozens of lives touched, mentored, or funded by a man they thought they knew. And not just help, life-changing support. He had paid for school fees, bought tools, taught carpentry skills, helped start businesses. All done anonymously, under the radar. Laura sat frozen. How did he manage this? We barely had savings. Tucked under the folders was a spiral notebook. On the first page, Ledger Tom had kept meticulous records. Every dollar earned, saved, and spent. He had taken side carpentry jobs across the state, sold handcrafted furniture online, even moonlighted as a janitor in Seattle during summers. Ben flipped through it, stunned. Dad was working double lives, one as a father, one as a quiet guardian. Angel. At the bottom of the box was a letter addressed to my children. I know I wasn't always expressive. I didn't grow up in a family that said I love you or hugged often, but I wanted to leave the world a little better, even if I couldn't always explain why. Maybe you'll think I should have told you. Maybe I should have. But sometimes the quiet work matters more than the credit. All I ever wanted was for you to live with kindness and courage. Tears filled Laura's eyes. Ben put a hand on her shoulder. Ashley clutched the letter like it was gold. They had come looking for secrets. Instead, they found a legacy. Back at the hotel, Laura couldn't sleep. She kept the letter on her lap, reading and rereading Tom's words. The next morning, Ashley made a bold suggestion. We should meet. Them, she said. The people Dad helped. Ben agreed. It's the only way we'll understand why he did what he did. Using the contact information from the folders, they spent the next week tracking people down. To their surprise, nearly everyone welcomed them. First was Brian Thomas, the boy in the photo, now 25. Brian was a mechanical engineering student at MIT. He met them in a cozy coffee shop near campus. Tom was my mentor, Brian said. He showed up every Saturday, brought tools, taught me how to build. Never talked much about himself. Just said he knew what it felt like to be lost. Then came Lisa, our now a proud bakery owner. She hugged Laura as if she were an old friend. I was living in my car with a baby, Lisa recalled. Tom helped me find a job, then quietly left me an envelope with the first month's rent for a small apartment. He told me, just pay it forward someday. They met a veteran with PTSD whom Tom had taught woodworking as therapy. A young woman who said Tom paid her application fees to nursing school, and a refugee family he helped furnish their first apartment in America. Each story revealed more of the man Tom had been, a quiet observer who acted decisively when he saw need. Laura was overwhelmed. Why didn't he tell me? Ashley touched her hand. Maybe he didn't need the world to know. He just needed it to change. Later that evening, they visited the last name on the list, a social worker named Amiri Chen. She invited them into her modest office in a community center. Tom was special, she said. He never asked for recognition. But I kept a folder too of letters, receipts, pictures. I knew someday his family might want to know. Mary handed them a box of her own filled with handwritten thank you, notes, sketches, and even a wooden toy carved with the initials TH as they left. Laura whispered this wasn't just a side of him. This was him, the man I loved all along. Tom's legacy wasn't money or fame. It was change, quiet, persistent, and deeply human. Before flying back to Montana, the family made one last stop, a modest woodworking school on the outskirts of Tacoma. It was tucked behind an industrial park, easy to miss unless you were looking. But Tom's name was on the community board just inside the entrance. It's Tom Henderson's Scholarship Fund, in memory of a quiet teacher. They were greeted by a man in his early 50s named Marcus Hill, the school's founder. His eyes lit up when they introduced themselves. "You're Tom's family," he said, shaking Laura's hand with warmth. "Come on in. Let me show you what he helped build." The tour revealed a humble but vibrant space filled with workbenches, young students shaping wood and shelves lined with projects, cabinets, chairs, toys, and carvings. Marcus explained that Tom had reached out to him 12 years earlier. After seeing a news segment about vocational programs being cut from local schools, he sent a handwritten letter, Marcus said he was a retired carpenter who believed kids needed to learn how to work with their hands. He enclosed a small check, $500, and said he'd send more if we kept going. Tom had kept that promise. Every month, without fail, a check arrived. And once a year, Tom himself would come down and teach a weekend course quietly, under the name Mr. H. No one here even knew his real name. Marcus chuckled. He never wanted attention. Just rolled up his sleeves and taught. Always brought donuts. Laura smiled softly, imagining her husband in that space, showing teenagers how to shape dovetail joints, how to listen to the grain of the wood, how to sand with patience. Ashley walked over to a display shelf where a series of hand-carved wooden plaques were mounted. One caught her eye. It read, "In memory of Mr. H, he gave us tools, but also belief." Beside it was a photo, grainy, slightly out of focus, but unmistakably Tom, surrounded by smiling students, holding a carving chisel in one hand and a coffee in the other. Ben turned to Marcus. "Why didn't he ever tell us?" Marcus paused. Maybe because he wasn't doing it for you to know. He was doing it because he remembered what it was like to be a kid with no one who believed in him. Back at their hotel that evening, Laura finally shared something she'd never told the kids. "When I first met your father," she said, "he was living in a rented garage. He didn't even own a bed, just a mattress on the floor and a box of woodworking tools. I asked why he didn't just sell the tools and start over." "What did he say?" Ashley asked. "He said, because if I still have my tools, I can build again." The silence that followed was full of meaning. They understood now not just what Tom had done, but why. His silence wasn't emotional distance. It was discipline. His quiet wasn't absence. It was purpose. He hadn't told them because he wanted them to live their own lives. But now, his story was a gift. One final piece of craftsmanship, handed down like a finished table or rocking chair, meant to be used, understood, and appreciated. Tom Henderson wasn't just a father or a carpenter. He was a builder of lives. And, in his silence, he had carved something lasting, not just out of wood, but out of love. When they returned to Montana, everything looked the same: the quiet streets of Helena, the wind-shaken pine trees, and the porch where Tom used to drink his black coffee. But to Laura, Ben, and Ashley, nothing felt the same anymore. The man they'd buried 2 weeks earlier had become a different man in their hearts, fuller, more vivid, and more complex than they had ever imagined. Laura stood in the workshop behind their house, where Tom had spent countless hours sanding, cutting, hammering in silence. The smell of sawdust lingered in the air. Half-finished projects still sat on the workbench. A baby cradle, a bookshelf, and a drawer of carefully sorted wood scraps. But now she looked at them not as relics of a hobby, but as remnants of a mission. "I used to think he just needed space," Laura said aloud, walking through the shop. "Turns out he needed purpose." Ben and Ashley joined her. They had an idea. "Let's not let this die with him," Ben said. "Let's finish these pieces. And then, let's do more." Ashley nodded. "We can donate them, or sell them and start a fund in his name, a real one. One that helps kids like the ones he believed in." That night, they sat at the kitchen table and drew up a plan. They would start the Tom Henderson Foundation for Quiet Builders, a nonprofit dedicated to vocational training, mentoring, and support for underprivileged youth, not just in Montana, but eventually nationwide. With help from Marcus Hill and Mary Chen, they created a website, gathered testimonials, and launched a crowdfunding campaign. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in. Donations came from strangers who had once been helped by Tom and from others who were inspired by his story. But the biggest surprise came 2 weeks later. An old man in a dusty blue truck pulled into their driveway and knocked on the door. "You don't know me," he said, "but I knew your father. His name was George Melton. He had served with Tom during their short time in the Marines. Laura had known Tom had been in the military, but he rarely talked about it. "Tom saved my life," George said, "in more ways than one. After the war, I was lost, drinking too much, angry at everything. He was the only one who stayed in touch, sent me books, encouraged me to build again. That's how I opened my furniture shop." George handed them an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000. "For the foundation," he said simply. Tom would have wanted it. Laura was speechless. Ben shook the man's hand. Ashley hugged him. That night, they opened one of the drawers in Tom's desk and found a small wooden box with a lid carved in cursive. "To be continued." Inside were pieces of paper, sketches of furniture, quotes scribbled from books, and one final letter dated just 6 months before his death. Legacy isn't what you leave behind in a will. It's what you leave behind in people. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. But I believe in you, all of you. Build something good. Not just with your hands, but with your hearts. Laura cried for the first time since his funeral. Not from grief, but from the overwhelming beauty of knowing that even in death, Tom was still teaching them how to live. He hadn't just left them furniture or tools. He had left them a blueprint for purpose, humility, and quiet impact. And for the first time in their lives, they weren't just his family. They were his legacy. A year after Tom's passing, Helena's community center was filled with people for an event unlike any Laura had ever imagined. The first annual Quiet Builders Awards ceremony, organized by the foundation, attended by over 200 guests and streamed online, was dedicated to honoring individuals who embodied Tom Henderson's silent spirit of service. Laura stood near the back, hands folded tightly, watching Ben on stage adjusting the microphone. He'd grown into something new this past year, more grounded, more expressive. Ashley, now the foundation's director of outreach, greeted guests by name, her eyes bright with purpose. Their father had changed them, even after his death. The lights dimmed. A slideshow played on the screen, photos of Tom working in his shop, snapshots from the folders they'd found in Seattle, smiling, faces of those he'd helped. There were audible gasps from some audience members when they recognized their own image, their own story. The keynote speaker, Mary Chen, stepped forward next. Tom never asked for thanks. He never waited for praise. He simply did what needed to be done, she said. In a world that too often rewards noise, Tom proved that the quietest among us can make the deepest impact. After the applause faded, Laura was invited to say a few words. She hesitated at first. Public speaking had never been her thing. But then she thought of Tom, quietly brave, stubbornly kind, and stepped up to the podium. "My husband never talked much about his past," she began. But he spoke volumes through his actions. "For 40 years, I loved a man, I thought. I understood. And now, every day, I discover him anew through the lives he touched." She paused, her voice trembling. "Some people chase legacies. Others build them in silence. Tom didn't tell us who to be. He showed us. And I'm proud that we're finally learning the language he used. Wood, time, humility, kindness." The audience stood and applauded, many with tears in their eyes. After the ceremony, a teenage boy approached Laura shyly. "Ma'am," he said, holding out a small wooden box. "I made this in the program this year. First thing I ever built. Just wanted to say thank you. I didn't have anyone before this." Laura opened the box. Inside was a carved message, "For Mr. H, you changed the world for me." She smiled through tears, touched the box gently, and whispered, "He would have said you changed it for yourself." As the night wound down and people mingled with laughter and soft piano music playing in the background, Laura stepped outside for air. The stars glittered over Helena, and for a brief moment, she felt Tom beside her, not in body, but in everything. His silence, his strength, his endless giving. It had never been about what he left behind. It was about who he'd empowered to go forward. 5 years have passed since Laura opened that safety deposit box in Seattle. The Tom Henderson Foundation now runs mentorship programs in 3 states, offering carpentry apprenticeships, financial literacy classes, and quiet support to those often overlooked, just like Tom once did, without fanfare. Ben left his job in corporate finance and now teaches woodworking at a vocational school in Billings. He still keeps one of his father's original notebooks on his desk, a reminder that real success is measured in lives touched, not titles earned. Ashley, the heart behind the foundation's growth, recently gave a TEDx talk titled "The Quiet Revolution: What My Father Taught Me About Impact Without Applause." The talk went viral. She ended it holding the same letter Tom had written. "All I ever wanted was for you to live with kindness and courage." Laura still lives in their small house in Helena, surrounded by Tom's handcrafted furniture. Every Saturday, neighborhood kids come by for build days, a new tradition, started by Ashley and carried on by local volunteers. Laura bakes cookies and tells stories. She rarely speaks of Tom in the past tense, because in many ways, he never truly left. She often thinks back to that last rocking chair unfinished when he died, now placed in the corner of her living room. She'll never let anyone finish it. Sits there, just as he left it, a symbol of everything he started and trusted others to continue. Quiet men don't make headlines, but sometimes they change the world anyway. And Tom Henderson, father, builder, quiet hero, was one of them. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of discovery, quiet courage, and a father's hidden legacy. If Tom's story touched your heart, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to Real Moments for more real-life stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the quiet strength in everyday people. We'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you discovered your parent had lived a second life of selfless giving? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And most of all, remember this: sometimes the most extraordinary lives are lived in silence, not for applause, but for impact. Not for legacy, but for love. We'll see you in the next real moment.